Chapter 6. It smells awful in here, Josh muttered. Josh, this closet is full of cleaning stuff. Dink told him. It's supposed to smell awful. Could you guys whisper? Rose said. We want our parents to wake up and find us gone. It was nearly midnight, 10 minutes before. The kids had snuck out of their room, then hidden in the closet. Josh yawned. I should be asleep. I was having a great dream, he said. Instead, I'm squashed in here like a sardine waiting for a dumb ghost who isn't even real. They grinned in the dark. I heard the ghosts hate kids with red hair, he whispered. Yeah, well, I heard the ghosts eat blonde-haired kids for breakfast. Suddenly, Ruth Rose put out both hands. Shh! I heard something, she said. Josh snorted. Nice try, Ruth Rose, but shh! Whispered Dink. I heard something, too. Pushed the closet door open and a crack. All three kids peered into the hallway. Dink heard a groan, like the wind howling through a cave. Suddenly, a tall white figure appeared at the end of the hall, gave a shimmering white light, and seemed to float above the floor. Oh my gosh! Josh, I want to go back to bed. Ghost wore a long white gown. His hair was white and stuck up in spikes, and there were just black empty holes where the eyes should have been. Josh grabbed Dink's arm. It hurt, but Dink was too scared to say anything. The figure drifted slowly toward the kids' hiding place. It carried a long silver sword. It knows we're in here, Josh squeaked. The ghost paused at each door, then stopped in front of room 202. It's our room, Dink thought. The ghost moaned. Every hair on his head stood up. He felt very cold, as if someone had opened a window. The ghost floated to the next room. This time, it moved. Outside of room 204, the ghost moaned its final message. Rose, take your fan and leave now. Then the ghost drifted back the way it came. It had come. Seconds later, the hallway was empty. Ruth Rose jumped up and shoved the door open. Come on, let's see where it went, she said. Who cares where it went? Josh said. I'm out of here. Come on, Josh, Dink said. I promised Mr. and Mrs. Bivens we'd get rid of the ghost, and we only have till morning. But what if it gets rid of us instead? Dink grabbed Josh's arms and started down the hallway. He stopped and listened at room 202. He heard his father snoring and grinned. Suddenly, Josh stuck his nose in the air. What's that smell? He said. Dink shrugged and kept walking. Ruth Rose had reached the end of the hall. It disappeared, she said. When they were standing together, I smell it here too, Josh said. Smell what? Ruth Rose asked. I don't know, Josh said. It reminds me of something. Around the corner, the kids found a gray metal door and a red sign on it that read fire exit. Maybe it went through here, Ruth Rose whispered, pointing to the door. Dink held his breath and slowly pushed the door open. Clearly, it's not one of those that are linked to an alarm. The kids peered into the stairwell and saw dark steps going up and down. Should we split up and check it out? Dink said. No way, Josh said. We stick together. Dink grinned at his friend. Still think the ghost is a joke? Josh made a face at Dink. Guys, Ruth Rose said, how did the ghost know our names? And which rooms we were in? Maybe it has supernatural powers, Josh said. Or maybe the ghost is really someone in the hotel, Dink added. Someone who knows us. Ruth Rose nodded. I think the ghost came out tonight looking just for us. You mean to scare us away, like it did the other people? Dink asked. Ruth Rose nodded again. Well, it worked, Josh said. Let's hit the trail. Hey, what's this? Ruth Rose asked. She plucked a white hair off of the door frame. Dink examined the hair. The ghost had white hair like this. He said, yeah, Ruth Rose said. The ghosts don't lose hair. People do. Suddenly, the door to room 204 opened. Ruth Rose's father popped his head out. Okay, you guys, it's time to hit the sack. But Dad, we just... Ruth Rose said. Her father shook his head. Say goodnight to the boys, Ruth Rose, now. Chapter 7. By 9 the next morning, the three families were down in the lobby. Ruth Rose's parents had treated them all to breakfast at Ellie's diner. Then they'd walk back to the hotel for their luggage. While the adults thanked Mr. Lincolnletter and the Spivets, the kids huddled on the sofa. What are we going to do? Dink asked. Mr. and Mrs. Spivets are selling the hotel today. Ruth Rose pulled the white hair from her pocket. This proves that someone is pretending to be the ghost, she said, but we don't know who or why. Maybe one of the guests has white hair, Josh said. Josh, all the guests are gone, except Mr. and Mrs. Jeffers, and they both have dark hair, Ruth Rose reminded him. Could the hair be from a wig? Dink asked. The ghost could have been wearing a costume and makeup. That's it! Josh cried. Last night, I smelled makeup in the hall. I remember that yucky smell from last Halloween. Just then, Mr. Lincolnletter walked over to the kids. He looked even more unhappy than he had the day before. This is a sad day, Mr. Lincolnletter said. Yeah, Trail and Roosh will be here at noon with the papers. Noon? Ruth Rose jumped up. Then we still have 3 hours! Mr. Lincolnletter gazed down at her. I'm afraid it's too late. He shook his head and walked away. We have to find out who's pretending to be the ghost, Ruth Rose said. If we don't, Livy and Mr. Lincolnletter will lose their jobs. Mr. and Mrs. Spivets will lose their home, Dink added. Guys, I think I know who the ghost is, Josh said. Dink and Ruth Rose stared at him. Well, Dink said, who? The only people left in the hotel are Livy and Mr. Lincolnletter. And his aunt and uncle, right? Right, Ruth Rose said. And we know that none of them wanted the hotel to be torn down, Josh said. Josh continued. You forgot about Mr. and Mrs. Jeffers, Dink said. They're still here. Josh grinned. Bingo! The Jeffers? Ruth Rose said. But they said they saw the ghost outside their room. Sure, they saw the ghost, Josh said. One of them is the ghost. I know how we can find out, Dink said. We'll have to search their room. Mr. Lincolnletter will never let us do that, Josh said. Well, maybe he won't let us, but I know someone who might, Ruth Rose said. Who? asked Dink. Livy. The kids said goodbye to their families, then hurried to the door that led to the basement. They found Livy in a cozy room drinking a cup of tea. She was wearing her maid's uniform. Morning, kids, she said. What brings you down here? We saw the ghost last night, Ruth Rose said. Livy's eyes widened. Really? Where? Tell me. The kids explained about spending the night in the hotel and hiding in the cleaning closet. It was so creepy, Josh said. First, we heard these weird noises, then the thing came out of nowhere. It glowed, Ruth Rose said. She showed Livy the white hair, and we found this. We think the ghost is one of the guests wearing a costume and wig, Dink explained. Suddenly, Livy let out a gasp. It was a wig, she cried. What was? Ruth Rose asked. I just remembered, Livy said. Yesterday I was in 301 getting ready to vacuum when I looked under the bed for shoes and stuff, and I saw this hairy white thing. I thought it was a rat, but it could have been a white wig. Who's in room 301? Dink asked. Livy shrugged. I don't know their names, but they're a nice couple from New York. Could you let us in so we could check out the room for clues? Ruth Rose asked. Livy shook her head. I'm sorry, but you know Mr. Lincolnletter is about the guest's privacy. But Mr. and Mrs. Spivets hired us to get rid of the ghost, Dink said. Besides, if they have to sell the hotel, you and Mr. Lincolnletter will lose your jobs. And Mr. and Mrs. Spivets will have to move, Ruth Rose added. Please, Livy, it won't take us long. Livy took a moment to think. Okay, she said finally, but just for 2 minutes. Hey, what's this? Josh had stuck his head into a small opening in the wall. That's an old dumbwaiter, Livy said. In the old days, the hotel sent food up to guests. Each room had one of these little elevator things. When the food got up there, the guests just opened the door and pulled out their food tray. Our room didn't have one, Dink said. None of them do anymore, Livy said. When the hotel closed its kitchen, the dumbwaiters were sealed up. She pointed to the one in her wall. That's the only hole left. Josh stuck his head back into the opening. Cool, this thing goes way up. Right, Livy explained. The shaft is still here, but the openings into the rooms are covered over. Josh yelled. Hello? Into the empty shaft. His voice came echoing back. Livy finished her tea. Okay, let's go, she said. I'll be glad when Mr. Lincolnletter is back to normal again. He's even grouchier than usual. Livy took the kids to the third floor and knocked at room 301. When no one answered, she unlocked the door and pushed it open. Please don't touch anything, she said. She knelt down and peeked under both beds. The wig's gone! The kids looked around the room. Maybe it's in the closet? Ruth Rose whispered. Livy pulled open the closet door. On the top shelf sat a plastic head wearing a spiky white wig. That's it, Josh said. Can you take it down? Dink asked. Livy carefully took the head down and set it on a table. Ruth Rose removed the white hair from her pocket and held it to the wig. The hairs are the same, she said. Chapter 8. Look! Dink pointed to a small framed picture on the bedside table. Mr. and Mrs. Jeffers. You know these people? Livy asked. We met them yesterday, Ruth Rose said. We think one of them might be the ghost. Livy's eyes grew wide. Why would they want to scare the guests away? They seem so nice. That's what we plan to find out, Dink said. Livy carefully placed the wig on the closet shelf. As she stepped back, her arm caught something. A long silver object clunked to the floor. It's the ghost's sword, Ruth Rose said, and she picked it up and laughed. It's just painted wood. Guys, look at this stuff. Josh had been examining some tubes and bottles on the vanity table. Look, white clown makeup and black. This is what I smelled in the hallway last night. Hey guys, a tape recorder, Ruth Rose said. Kids, don't touch. Before Libby could finish, Ruth Rose had pushed the play button. Suddenly the room was filled with spooky noises. Livy and the kids listened as the voice moaned and groaned. Those are the same noises we heard last night, Dink said. Have you seen Mr. and Mrs. Jeffers this morning? Ruth Rose asked Livy. Livy shook her head. Maybe they went out to breakfast. She looked at her watch. And I have to get busy. Livy locked the door behind them. And they all got in the elevator. Thanks for letting us in, Ruth Rose said to Livy. Livy put her finger to her lips. Let's keep this a secret, okay? She whispered from you-know-who. It's a deal, Ruth Rose whispered back. The elevator door opened and Livy left the kids in the lobby. There's Mr. Lincolnletter, Josh said. Maybe he knows where Mr. and Mrs. Jeffers went. The kids walked over to the front of the desk. Mr. Lincolnletter looked as if he hadn't been to bed. His suit was rumpled and his hair stuck up in the back. Maybe we shouldn't disturb him, Ruth Rose whispered. But we have to find Mr. and Mrs. Jeffers, Dink said. We don't have much more time. Dink walked up to the desk and put on his best smile. Hi, Mr. Lincolnletter. Mr. Lincolnletter gazed down at Dink. Oh, hello, he said. Do you happen to know where Mr. and Mrs. Jeffers are this morning? He asked. Mr. Lincolnletter waved his hand toward the door. They told me they were going to Ellie's for breakfast. Thanks, Mr. Lincolnletter, Dink said. The kids left the hotel and hurried up Main Street towards Ellie's diner. What are we going to say to them? Josh asked. We can't just walk up and accuse them of being the ghost, can we? Ruth Rose pushed open the door to the diner. Don't worry, she said. I have a plan. Ellie was behind the counter, mixing tuna salad in a big bowl. She waved as the kids sat in one of the booths. There they are, Josh whispered. He nodded his head toward another booth, where Mr. and Mrs. Jeffers were eating breakfast. They look so nice, Dink said. Not like people who would try to ruin a hotel. Ellie came to their booth. Back so soon? She said, opening her pad. Don't tell me you're having another breakfast. Can I buy your pad and pencil? Ruth Rose asked. Ellie gave Ruth Rose a sly smile and handed them over. What are you kids up to? She asked. I'll give them back in a minute, Ruth Rose said. Okie dokie. I'll see you in a minute, then, Ellie said, heading back to her tuna salad. Ruth Rose began writing. What are you doing? Josh asked. Wait a sec, Ruth Rose said. She finished and put the pad in front of Dink and Josh. What do you think? Dear Mr. and Mrs. Jeffers, we know all about the white wig and the tape recorder. Guess who? Ruth Rose, what if we're wrong about the Jeffers? Dink asked. We're not wrong, Ruth Rose said, getting up. She walked over to Ellie and said something to her and handed her the pad. Ellie smiled at Ruth Rose, then headed for the Jeffers booth. Ruth Rose hurried back and sat down. Now watch, she told Dink and Josh. They watched as Ellie handed the note to the Jeffers. The Jeffers read the note, then said something to Ellie. Ellie pointed towards the kids. Mrs. Jeffers waved, and Ruth Rose waved back. Come on, Ruth Rose said. She walked over to the Jeffers booth. Dink and Josh were right behind her. Hi, Ruth Rose said, pulling the white hair from her pocket. I think your wig got caught on the fire door last night. You left this. She placed the white hair on the green placemat. Mrs. Jeffers stared at the hair, then at the kids. Finally, she looked at her husband. Mr. Jeffers sighed, then grinned at the kids. Looks like you got us, he said. Chapter 9. So you really are the ghost? Ruth Rose asked. Mr. Jeffers nodded. That was me last night, he said. Cindy here was the ghost the first 2 nights. He looked at the kids. Weren't you asleep in your rooms when I came by? We hid in the smelly closet and saw you, Josh said. Mr. Jeffers smiled. Do I make good ghosts? You scared me, Josh said. But why did you do it? Ruth Rose asked. We're both actors. We're broke, and we're broke, Mrs. Jeffers said. A few weeks ago, 3 men came up to us after rehearsal and asked us if we wanted a job. So we told them sure. Her husband said. The men told us to check into the Shangri-La and scare guests away. We came up with the ghost costume ourselves. How did you make it glow? Josh asked. I glued a string of tiny lights inside the gown. Mrs. Jeffers said. The battery was under the wig. Her husband smiled. And I thought of hiding the tape recorder in the basement dumbwaiter. The noise went all the way through the hotel walls. But that's so mean, Ruth Rose said. If the hotel closes, what will happen to Mr. Lincolnletter and Livy and Mr. and Mrs. Spivets? Mr. Jeffers put up his hands. Who said anything about closing the hotel? Mr. and Mrs. Spivets did, Dink said. They're selling the hotel because of you. What? Mrs. Jeffers said. But Mr. and Mr. Spivets are supposed to know all about the ghost act. So is Mr. Lincolnletter. Look, said Mr. Jeffers. 3 guys who hired us told us that the hotel is going to be used in a horror movie. Scaring guests away is supposed to be great publicity. All the guests are going to get their money back, plus free passes to the movie. And we're supposed to get starring parts in the movie. His wife said, it's a big break for us. The kids looked at each other. But Mr. and Mrs. Spivets don't know anything about any movie, Ruth Rose said. Neither does Mr. Lincolnletter. They're really upset because they're going to have to sell the hotel today. Yeah, Josh said. Mrs. Spivets was crying and everything. We even saw the letter from the real estate company, Dink said. We did? When? Their names were something like Peach or Roch, Etchroll, and Rouge. Mr. Jeffers said suddenly. That's them, Dink said. They've been trying to buy the hotel for a long time, but Mr. Spivets refused to sell until now. Mr. Jeffers looked at his wife. Oh. Oh no, he said. Etchrail and Rouge are the men who hired us. His wife had gone from happy to sad. No wonder they told us not to talk to Mr. Lincolnletter about the movie. There never was one. Her husband shook his head. All they wanted was the hotel, and we helped them get it. I feel terrible, Mrs. Jeffers said. She turned to her husband. Todd, isn't there anything we can do? Mr. Jeffers looked at the kids. Do you think it's too late? Yeah. Have they actually sold the hotel yet? Dink glanced at the clock over the counter. They're signing the papers at noon, he said. But I think I know how you can get rid of Etchrail and Roch and save the hotel at the same time. Chapter 10. This wig itches, Josh complained. He, Dink, and Ruth Rose were hiding behind the desk in the lobby. Josh was dressed as the ghost, complete with wig, robe, and makeup. It won't be long now, Dink said, glancing at the clock. It was almost noon. Etchrail and Rouge had better hurry up, Josh said. I'm going to suffocate in this dumb dress. From where he was hiding, Dink could see the rest of the lobby. Mr. Lincolnletter was sitting on a sofa with his aunt and uncle on the other side of the lobby. Mr. and Mrs. Jeffers were playing cards with Linda Gomez, the reporter from the Green Lawn Gazette. Next to her sat a man with a camera. What if they don't come? Ruth Rose whispered. Pink smiled and pointed at the front door. They just did. 3 men walked into the lobby. One was tall, one was medium, and the other was short and round. Each was dressed in a dark suit. White shirt, and blue tie. They look like 3 penguins, Josh said. Mr. Lincolnletter hurried over to the men, then led them back to his aunt and uncle. The tall man shook hands with Mr. Spivets. "I am Fletcher Each," he said. "I am Rudolph Rell," the medium-sized man said, sticking out his hand. "And I am Miles Rooch," the short man said, shaking hands in turn. Mr. Spivets nodded at them. "Have you brought the papers?" he asked. Fletcher Each beamed. "We certainly have," he said. He handed Mr. Spivets an important-looking document. Rudolph Rail removed an envelope from his briefcase. "And here's the check." Miles Root whipped a gold pen out of his pocket. "All we need is your signature, Mr. Spivets," he said. Mr. Spivets looked sadly at his wife, and then he took the pen and started to sign the document. Just then, Mr. and Mrs. Jeffers walked up. "Look, Todd," Mrs. Jeffers said. "It's the movie producers." "What a surprise," her husband said. "We were just talking about the movie you're going to film here in the hotel." Mr. Spivets paused. "What's this about a movie?" he asked suspiciously. Began Fletcher Each. "Well," started Rudolph Rail. "We can explain," said Miles Rooch. "There's no need to explain," said Linda Gomez. She stood up and walked towards the men. "I'm a reporter from the Green Lawn Gazette. Tomorrow my column will tell the whole town how you tried to trick these people into selling their hotel." The three men started to glare at Linda, then at the Jeffers. Finally, their eyes landed on Mr. and Mrs. Spivets. Fletcher Each turned pink. Ralph Rail went white. Miles Rooch turned purple. There was dead silence in the Shangri-La lobby. And then a ghost in the spiky white wig floated up from behind the desk. "Go home!" it moaned in a creepy voice. "Go home before it's too late!" Everyone in the lobby, except Reach, Rao, and Roch, started to laugh. "I guess I won't be needing this," Mr. Spivets said. He ripped the document he was holding into pieces. "What are you doing?" Fletcher Each sputtered. "You agreed to sell this hotel," Rudolph Rail said. You can't back out of the deal with Reach Rollin Roach," said Miles Rooch. Mrs. Spivets stood up next to her husband. "Reach Rollin Roach," she said. You should rearrange the letters in your names to spell cheat, liar, and crook." And now Mr. And now, Mr. Spivets said, I think it's time for you gentlemen to leave. Without a word, Mr. Lincolnletter escorted the 3 men to the front door. The man with the camera followed, snapping one picture after another. Everyone cheered. Flo Spivets cheered the loudest. Mrs. Jeffers turned back to Mr. and Mrs. Spivets. My husband and I are so sorry for what we did, she said. Can you ever forgive us? Of course we can, dear, Mrs. Spivets. In fact, said Mr. Spivets, you are such good ghosts, we'd like to invite you to do it again. One weekend a month, we'd like you to put on a Shangri-La mystery for our guests. What do you think? That's a great idea, Mr. Jeffers said. We can get some of our actor friends to help. The photographer snapped pictures of the Jeffers and the Spivets. Wait till my readers hear about this, Linda Gomez said, writing it all down on her pad. Then Mr. Spivets turned to Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose. And speaking of mysteries, I want to thank our 3 super sleuths. He pulled 3 envelopes out of his pocket. From the bottom of our hearts, Mrs. Spivets and I thank you, he said. He handed the envelopes to the kids. Please open these before you go to bed. The photographer snapped a picture as the kids blushed. Be sure to mention their names in the column, Mrs. Spivets said to Linda Gomez. My pleasure, Linda said. Now how about a few more pictures of those 3 kids? Dink and Ruth Rose looked into the camera and smiled. Wait! Josh said, struggling out of his ghost costume. I don't want my picture in the paper with this wig and dress on. Later that night, the kids met in Dink's living room. Dink was holding Loretta in his lap. She was nibbling on one of his shirt buttons. Josh pulled out the envelope Mr. Spivets had given him. Can we open these now? He asked. He said before we go to bed, Josh said. Dink said, this is before we go to bed. Josh is right, Luther said. I'm dying to know what's in mine. Let's open them on the count of 3, okay? 1, 2, 3. Oh, golly! My great Aunt Molly, Josh said. 3 plane tickets to Florida. Ruth Rose held up the contents of her envelope. 3 passes to Disney World! Dink gulped when he saw what was in his envelope. He pulled out 3 $50 bills and a note. Thank you for saving our hotel and solving another Shangri-La mystery. Say hi to Mickey and Goofy for us. Much gratitude, Ed and Flo Snippets. Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose jumped up and did a triple high five. Loretta crawled off the sofa. No one was looking, so she started chewing one of the $50 bills. And that's where it ends. Let's just hope Dink got her away from that money before she got to the Disney World tickets. Yeah, let's just hope he put her back before she got to the Disney World tickets. So that was A to Z Mysteries, The Haunted Hotel. It's a good mystery. It's not like the best mystery ever, but it's definitely not the worst either. So those are my thoughts on it. I hope you guys enjoyed this dramatic reading, and I will see you guys next time.